This story is based on fragmented online reports, archived forum posts, and secondhand testimonies found across the internet. We do not claim this account to be factual. We do not believe in the supernatural and do not promote belief in mysticism. All names, locations, and identifying details have been intentionally altered. We do not seek contact with any individuals, businesses, or parties possibly connected to these events. This story is presented for informational and storytelling purposes only.
In early 2025, while researching unrelated material, we came across a series of old forum threads that had almost completely disappeared from public view. Most of them were buried in archived discussions, saved screenshots, or quoted in posts that no longer existed. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than internet noise, scattered comments, vague warnings, and half-finished stories, with no clear ending. But one detail kept repeating: a porcelain doll, always described the same way, always appearing in different places, always returning. At first, we ignored it. Stories about haunted objects are common online. They usually rely on exaggeration, anonymous sources, or obvious attempts to scare. But this was different. The tone of the posts wasn't emotional. It was restrained, almost reluctant. People didn't seem eager to talk about the doll. They seemed tired of it. Some posts were written years apart, by users who had no visible connection to each other. Different writing styles, different platforms, yet the descriptions matched with unsettling precision. A handmade porcelain doll. Mid-20th century, uncracked face. Unusually clean glass eyes. A warning label attached to its clothing, and a recurring sentence, written in slightly different ways every time. It always came back. As we dug deeper, we found photographs, low-quality images taken on old phones, some heavily compressed, others scanned from printed photos. The doll appeared in different rooms, under different lighting, placed on different surfaces, shelves, tables, display cases, but the expression never changed. The eyes reflected light in a way that made it difficult to tell where the camera ended and the room began. And in every image, the doll seemed slightly out of place. Not centered, not displayed properly, but positioned as if someone had set it down quickly and stepped away. One image, dated only by its file name, showed a small handwritten tag attached to the doll's wrist. There was no price, only a name: Emily Hart. Not for children. At that point, we assumed this was nothing more than a piece of creative folklore, a modern myth sustained by repetition. But the deeper we went, the more uncomfortable the pattern became. The earliest references didn't describe anything supernatural. They described grief. According to fragmented local records from the 1950s, a woman named Evelyn Hart lived in a small Midwestern town. She worked as a seamstress and costume restorer, known locally for repairing stage props and display mannequins. In 1956, her 7-year-old daughter, Emily Hart, died in what was officially recorded as an accident. No details were ever made public. Within the following months, Evelyn reportedly withdrew from social life. Neighbors later described her home as quiet and unchanged, as if time had stopped inside. It was during this period that the doll was made, not as a toy, not for sale, but as something closer to a memorial. Multiple sources claimed that Evelyn used personal materials while creating it: fragments of clothing, custom-ordered porcelain parts, and details meant to preserve her daughter's appearance rather than idealize it. The doll was never given away, at least not intentionally. In 1958, Evelyn Hart was found dead in her home. The cause of death was listed as unclear. There were no signs of forced entry. No public investigation followed, and after that, the doll vanished. For decades, there were no records of it, until it started appearing again. Not in museums, not in collections, but in places where unwanted things tend to surface: estate sales, storage cleanouts, small antique shops with no online presence. Each time it was sold, it didn't stay long. According to the accounts we found, buyers returned it, or abandoned it, or claimed it had reappeared where it didn't belong. One post, archived from a forum that no longer exists, summarized it with a single line: "Nobody keeps it." Nobody ever has a TSD's we considered stopping. There was no proof, no single source we could verify completely. but one name appeared repeatedly in connection with the more recent events. A journalist. Her name was Rachel Monroe, and unlike the anonymous forum users, she was willing to talk. Rachel Monroe was not difficult to find. Unlike most names connected to this story, she had a public presence. Articles published under her name, archived podcast episodes, social media accounts that had gone quiet sometime in late 2024. When we contacted her, she made one condition clear. She did not want to be associated with the story publicly. She did not want her name used to promote it, and she did not want to see the doll again. What she did agree to do was clarify a few facts. According to Rachel, she first encountered the doll in early 2024 while researching visual elements for a true crime project. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She described the purchase as accidental, something she noticed only because it stood apart from the rest of the items in the shop. She remembered that the doll was not displayed with other toys or collectibles. It wasn't positioned to attract attention. There was no price tag, only a handwritten label tied to its wrist. The same one we had seen in the photographs, Emily Hart. Not for children. Rachel said the store owner did not attempt to sell the doll to her. In fact, she recalled that he seemed almost indifferent to whether it left the store at all. There was no explanation of its origin. No sales pitch, just a brief warning that the doll had been returned before. At the time, she dismissed it. Rachel described herself as skeptical. She did not believe in haunted objects, curses, or paranormal explanations. To her, the doll was simply unsettling. A visual prop that carried emotional weight, something that would look uncomfortable in the background of a recording. She brought it home. For the first several days, nothing happened. The doll was placed on a shelf behind a recording setup. It remained there, untouched. Rachel continued working as usual, researching cold cases and unresolved disappearances. The first irregularities appeared in the audio. She initially assumed they were technical issues. Compression, artifacts, background noise, or errors introduced during editing. But as she reviewed the files more closely, patterns began to emerge. Certain recordings contained additional sounds that had not been present in the room. Not voices. Breathing. Movement. Low, indistinct murmurs beneath her own narration. What unsettled her most was that these sounds only appeared in episodes that focused on deceased individuals. Cases involving missing persons who were later confirmed dead. Victims whose final moments were poorly documented. Rachel stated that the disturbances never appeared during unrelated recordings. At first, she chose not to mention it publicly, but listeners noticed. Emails began arriving with questions about details she did not remember, including specific information, names, locations, minor facts that had never been released officially. She reviewed her scripts repeatedly. The information was not there, and yet it appeared in the final audio. Rachel told us that the doll itself did not move, at least not in a way she could clearly confirm, but she became aware of subtle changes. Its orientation, the direction it faced, the way it seemed positioned closer to her workspace after nights she couldn't remember clearly. She denied touching it. What changed everything, she said, was a single recording session she never finished. While researching an unsolved case from the late 1990s, Rachel paused the recording to check a source. When she listened back later, the audio file contained an additional segment. Her voice stopped mid-sentence, and another sound continued. She did not describe it as speech, only as something attempting to form words. The recording was deleted. Shortly after, Rachel began searching for information about the doll itself. What she found was inconsistent, fragmented, and deeply unsettling. References to previous owners appeared under different names, different decades, different circumstances, but the outcomes were disturbingly similar. The doll never stayed with anyone for long. Some owners returned it, some attempted to discard it, some abandoned it entirely, and some, according to public records, did not live long afterward. Rachel emphasized that she did not believe the doll caused these events directly, but she acknowledged that every person connected to it shared a common trait. They were all looking into someone else's death. As her research progressed, Rachel's own work slowed. She stopped publishing episodes, Friends later described her as withdrawn and distracted. She reportedly complained of insomnia and a persistent feeling of being watched while recording. Eventually, she made a decision. Rachel returned the doll to the same antique store where she had purchased it. She did not ask for a refund. She did not ask questions. According to her account, the owner accepted the doll without comment. There was no surprise, no reaction, only a brief acknowledgement, as if this was something he had done before. Rachel told us that she felt immediate relief afterward. But the story did not end there. Several weeks later, while passing the shop by chance, she saw the doll again, displayed openly, with a different name written on the tag. The warning, however, remained unchanged. Not for children. After speaking with Rachel Monroe, we returned to the material we had already collected. This time, we weren't looking for stories. We were looking for repetition. Once the doll had a confirmed modern owner, the older posts began to align differently. What initially seemed like unrelated anecdotes started to resemble fragments of the same object moving through time. The photographs were the first clue. We began grouping them by visual details rather than dates. The same porcelain texture, the same faint discoloration near the left eye, the same stitching pattern on the dress, repaired more than once, but always following the original seams. In several images, the doll appeared in private homes, on bookshelves, near desks, next to recording equipment, always placed slightly away from other objects, as if people instinctively gave it space. In others, it stood inside display cases, antique shops, thrift stores, estate sale tables. Different locations, same posture, same expression. Metadata was mostly missing, but a few files contained partial timestamps. When compared, they showed something unusual. The images were not clustered in one period. They appeared every few years, sometimes a decade apart, as if the doll resurfaced briefly, then vanished again. Forum discussions provided additional context. In one archived thread, a user described purchasing a porcelain doll from an estate sale in the early 2000s. They mentioned that it felt out of place, and that they experienced persistent unease while working late at night. The post ended abruptly. Another user, years later, responded to that same thread, claiming they had seen the doll in a different state, under a different name, but with the same warning tag. There was no follow-up. In yet another case, a small blog post from the late 1980s described an archivist who had acquired a similar doll while cataloging donated items from a closed psychiatric facility. The author noted that the archivist became increasingly isolated before suffering a fatal fall from a stairwell at work. The post concluded with a single sentence: "The doll was returned to storage. Public records confirmed the death. What they did not explain was why the doll kept appearing near people involved in death, trauma, or unresolved loss." As we cross-referenced names, another pattern emerged. The doll was rarely kept by collectors. It was almost always acquired by people who worked with stories. Journalists, researchers, social workers, archivists, people who listened. Several forum users described a similar experience. At first, nothing happened. Then came minor disturbances. Poor sleep, unusual sounds, the sense that recordings didn't fully capture what had been said. One post described reviewing a tape recording and hearing additional information layered beneath the speaker's voice, names spoken too softly to isolate, but clear enough to recognize when compared to case files. Another mentioned that certain objects in the room appeared repositioned, though no clear movement was ever witnessed. No one described the doll walking. No one described it speaking. What they described instead was awareness, as if the object was responding rather than acting. One of the more disturbing discoveries came from a collection of deleted comments recovered through cached pages. A user claimed that after attempting to discard the doll, they began finding references to it in places they didn't expect. Old photographs, unrelated listings, even background images in posts made by strangers. The user concluded their comment with a statement that stood out. "It's not attached to a place, it's attached to attention." As we continued digging, we identified at least 6 individuals who had possessed the doll at different points between the 1960s and the early 2020s. 3 of them were no longer alive. Their deaths were listed as accidents. vehicle collision, a fall from height, an unexplained incident classified as. One individual, according to family statements archived online, chose to leave this world after a prolonged period of isolation. No direct connection was ever established. No investigation mentioned the doll. But in each case, the object reappeared afterward, sometimes weeks later, sometimes years, always intact, always with a name. Always. 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 With the same. Always with the same one. The deeper we went, the clearer it became that the doll was not following people randomly. It followed proximity to loss. And once it had been noticed, it refused to stay unnoticed. At this point, we attempted to trace the doll's most recent movements. Several posts mentioned a specific antique shop never named, never photographed directly. The descriptions were vague, but consistent. A small store. No sign. Minimal online presence, and always the same owner. A man identified only as Thomas Caldwell. According to multiple accounts, Caldwell had owned the shop for decades. He was described as polite, reserved, and unwilling to discuss the doll in detail. One user claimed that Caldwell refused to answer questions about where it came from. Another stated that he'd never attempted to sell it aggressively, and a third wrote something that appeared repeatedly in different forms across multiple platforms. He doesn't act like he owns it. He acts like he's holding it. We could not verify these claims independently, but when we compared the timelines, something unsettling became clear. Every time the doll returned to that shop, a gap followed. No posts. No images. No mentions, until someone else took interest. And then the cycle began again. At some point, the story stopped feeling like a mystery. It began to feel like a record. Once we stopped treating the doll as the subject and started treating it as a reference point, the information became easier to organize. Names aligned, dates made sense. Gaps in the timeline no longer felt accidental. The doll was not central to these people's lives. It was peripheral, and yet it appeared at the same moment for all of them. We identified at least 6 confirmed owners between the late 1950s and the early 2020s. There may have been more, but documentation beyond that point becomes unreliable. The earliest verified owner after Evelyn Hart was a woman named Margaret Lewis. Margaret worked as a social services caseworker in the early 1970s. Her focus was family intervention and child welfare. According to archived employment records, she was involved in multiple cases dealing with unexplained domestic fatalities. The doll appeared in her possession in 1971, purchased during an estate sale connected to a closed boarding house. Less than a year later, Margaret Lewis died in a traffic incident classified as accidental. There was no indication of foul play. Her belongings were liquidated. The next documented owner was Daniel Price, an academic archivist working at a university library in the late 1980s. His role involved cataloging restricted materials, including old psychiatric records and sealed case files. Daniel reportedly acquired the doll while sorting through donated items from a defunct medical facility. According to a brief mention in a university newsletter, he kept it in his office for reasons that were never explained. Colleagues later described him as increasingly distracted, withdrawn, unwilling to discuss his work. In 1989, Daniel Price died after falling from an upper-level stairwell inside the building where he worked. The incident was ruled non-suspicious. The doll was removed from his office and placed into storage. Several years passed before it appeared again. In the early 2000s, the doll was purchased by Eleanor Finch, a private researcher known online for her work with cold cases and unidentified remains. Her posts were detailed, meticulous, and emotionally detached. At some point, after acquiring the doll, Eleanor's online activity slowed. Posts became less frequent, more fragmented. Family members later stated that she isolated herself almost completely. In 2003, Eleanor Finch made a personal decision to leave this world. No further information was released. Her possessions were distributed through private sale. Once again, the doll returned. What stood out was not how these people died. It was how similarly their lives shifted beforehand. Each of them became quieter. Each of them focused inward, and each of them was working with unresolved death at the time the doll entered their lives. None of the records described fear. None mentioned panic. What they described instead was preoccupation, as if attention itself had become a burden. During this period, we uncovered several references to a discontinued psychological research initiative from the late 1950s. The project name was redacted in most surviving documents, but its objective was partially preserved. The study aimed to explore whether traumatic memory could be externalized, not suppressed, not erased, but transferred. The concept was controversial, even at the time. Early researchers speculated that objects associated with trauma could act as anchors, not because of any supernatural property, but due to human perception, suggestion, and emotional reinforcement. One surviving report mentioned a handcrafted memorial object used during experimental sessions. The name Evelyn Hart appeared once. There were no conclusions. The project was terminated shortly after a participant died under unexplained circumstances. Funding was withdrawn. Materials were destroyed, or so it was claimed. When we compared this information with the doll's timeline, the overlap was impossible to ignore. From that point forward, the doll's appearances became more predictable. It surfaced near people engaged with unresolved loss. It remained long enough to be noticed, and then it left always intact, always unchanged. As we reviewed these cases, one detail repeated itself quietly in the background. None of the owners reported attempting to destroy the doll. They didn't describe anger toward it. They described hesitation, as if, on some level, they believed it was not theirs to decide, and almost all of them, according to secondary sources, tried to give it away. That attempt marked the beginning of the end. At this stage, we reached out to Thomas Caldwell. We did not ask him about curses. We did not ask him about deaths. We asked him how long the doll had been coming back. He did not give a number, but according to those who spoke with him before, his position had always been consistent. The doll was not kept. It was returned. Sometimes by the buyer, sometimes by family members, and sometimes, according to one account, without explanation at all. The doll would simply be there. Waiting, the deeper we went, the more fragmented the story became. There was no single source that explained where the doll known as Emily truly came from. Instead, there were dozens of incomplete accounts scattered across forgotten corners of the internet. Old forum threads with broken image links, archived blog posts written in the early 2000s, screenshots reposted again and again, always missing context, always ending abruptly. But one detail appeared in almost every version. The doll was not made as a toy. According to several antique collectors who had commented anonymously, the doll matched a very specific style of handcrafted porcelain figures produced in the late 1940s and early 1950s. These were not mass-produced dolls. They were commissioned pieces, often created to resemble real children. One name surfaced repeatedly in connection with that period: Margaret H. Bellamy. There are no official records listing Bellamy as a registered manufacturer. No company, no storefront. What little information exists comes from personal letters, estate documents, and a few local newspaper mentions from the Midwest, dated between 1947 and 1953. Bellamy was described not as a toy maker, but as a memorial artist. Her work involved creating likenesses of children who had died young. The dolls were commissioned by grieving families, often after accidents, illnesses, or house fires. Bellamy reportedly insisted on meeting the parents in person. She asked for photographs, measurements, hair clippings. One archived post, written by a user claiming to be Bellamy's grandniece, included a disturbing detail. Margaret Bellamy believed that children who died suddenly did not always understand that they were gone. She believed memories could become trapped. The post was later deleted. The earliest confirmed appearance of the doll that would later be called Emily dates back to 1951. A small, classified advertisement in a local Iowa paper mentioned a custom porcelain memorial doll delivered to a family whose 6-year-old daughter had died in a residential fire. The child's name was never printed, only the address. That address no longer exists. Multiple forum users attempted to trace what happened to the family. Census records show they moved less than a year later. No forwarding address, no death certificates beyond the child. What was preserved was a photograph, a grainy black and white image uploaded to a paranormal archive site sometime around 2011. It shows a living room, partially burned. Smoke damage visible on the walls. In the center of the image, sitting upright on a chair untouched by soot, is a porcelain doll. Its face is intact. Its eyes are open. People argued for years whether the photo was real. Some claimed it was staged. Others insisted the fire damage matched historical records from that exact street during the early 1950s. What unsettled most viewers was not the condition of the doll. It was the posture. The doll was not positioned like a display item. It looked as if it had been placed there intentionally facing the doorway. After that, the trail goes dark for nearly 3 decades. There are no records of the doll being sold, cataloged, or mentioned publicly between the early 1950s and the late 1980s. Collectors speculated passed quietly through private hands, estate sales, family inheritances, storage units. Then, in 1989, it reappears. A post on an early bulletin board system, preserved only through screenshots, describes a porcelain doll purchased from a flea market outside St. Louis. The user claimed the doll interfered with cassette recordings, adding faint breathing sounds beneath spoken audio. The account ends after 3 updates. The user never logged in again. In the mid-1990s, similar reports appear sporadically. Always vague, always dismissed, always disappearing after a short period of activity. By the early 2000s, the doll had gained a reputation among niche collector circles, not as cursed, but as unstable. Sellers refused to ship it. Buyers reported returns that happened without explanation. One antique shop owner wrote that the doll reappeared on a shelf 2 days after being sold, despite security footage showing it leaving the store. That claim was never proven. Then came 2025. This is where the story shifts from rumor to something harder to ignore. The name Emily enters the record through a journalist. Eerily name, which we will not use, was changed at her request. For the purpose of this story, she will be referred to as Emily Carter. She was not a paranormal investigator. She was not looking for haunted objects. Emily Carter was a freelance reporter covering online communities, misinformation, and modern folklore. Her interest in the doll began while researching how internet myths form around physical objects. She found the same threads we did, and she decided to track the doll down. According to her account, which she shared in a private email exchange later summarized on a forum, the doll was being kept at a small resale shop somewhere in the United States. The exact location was intentionally obscured. The shop owner feared publicity. We will call him Daniel Moore. Moore described the doll as a problem item, not because it scared customers, but because it refused to leave. He claimed it had been sold 6 times in under a year. Each time, it was returned within days, sometimes hours. One buyer claimed the doll appeared in their guest room after being locked in a car trunk. Another said they found it sitting upright on a chair they did not own. Moore stated that he never took the doll back himself. It just comes back, he reportedly said. Emily Carter arranged to see it in person. She described her first reaction as disappointment. The doll was smaller than expected. Unremarkable. Pale porcelain, lace dress, glass eyes that reflected light strangely, but showed no visible damage, no cracks, no burn marks. There was a tag tied loosely around its wrist. It read, "Emily not for children." Emily Carter photographed the doll from multiple angles. She later wrote that something about the images bothered her, not while taking them. Only afterward, she claimed that in several photos, the doll appeared to be looking in different directions despite not being moved. In one image, its eyes reflected a shape that did not match the room. She did not publish those photos. That same week, Emily Carter purchased the doll. What happened after that was never written as a single article. It exists only as fragments. Forum summaries, screenshots of deleted posts, secondhand retellings from people who claim to have spoken to her directly. She kept the doll in her apartment for less than 3 days. During that time, She reported technical issues with her recording equipment, audio distortions, files saving themselves, background sounds she could not account for. She also mentioned something else. While researching unresolved death cases for an unrelated story, she began receiving information she had not searched for. Names, dates, details that matched sealed records. She believed it was coincidence until the doll changed position. Emily Carter returned it to the shop. Daniel Moore placed it back on the shelf. 2 days later, it was gone. Sold again. By the end of that month, 3 people connected to the doll were dead. One was struck by a vehicle while crossing an empty street late at night. Witnesses stated he stepped forward without looking. Another fell from a height while performing routine maintenance on his home. Friends described him as cautious, methodical. The third individual, according to a single post that was quickly removed, made the decision to leave this world on his own terms. No official connection was ever established. No investigation followed, and the doll returned. What made the story harder to ignore was not the number of accounts. It was their consistency. Different people, different platforms, different years, but the same details kept repeating, almost word for word, as if they were being copied from a source no one could find. Many posts describe the same sensation when standing near the doll: a pressure in the chest, a faint ringing in the ears, a feeling that someone was waiting for you to say something first. Several users mentioned that the doll seemed inert, less spoken about in connection with the dead. One collector wrote that the doll remained lifeless for weeks, sitting untouched on a shelf, until he mentioned a local cold case while on a phone call. That night, his home security camera recorded a brief audio distortion, a low, breath-like sound, before cutting out. Another post archived from a now-defunct paranormal forum described an experiment. The user placed the doll in a soundproof room with a digital recorder and read aloud the names of missing persons. The recording contained faint whispers that aligned with specific dates and locations, many of which were later verified through public records. The thread was deleted within hours. Those who tried to analyze the doll rationally often reached the same conclusion. It did not behave like a haunted object. It behaved like a conduit, not for spirits in a religious sense, but for information that should not be accessible. That distinction mattered, and it terrified the wrong people. By early 2025, references to the doll began appearing outside paranormal spaces, tech forums, audio engineering groups. Even small true crime communities noticed strange overlaps between unsolved cases and leaked anonymous tips that shared phrasing identical to posts connected to the doll. Some moderators quietly banned discussion of it, citing misinformation. Others claimed users associated with the topic vanished without explanation. Emily Carter noticed this pattern before anyone else. In a summary of her findings, later reposted by a third party, she explained that the doll's appearances coincided with spikes in unresolved case discussions. Every time the doll resurfaced, information followed, often accurate, often disturbing. She believed the doll did not create events. It surfaced when attention focused on them. Emily described it as a mirror rather than a weapon, but mirrors can still be dangerous. Her second encounter with the doll happened after its return to Daniel Moore's shop. Moore had attempted to remove it discreetly. He claimed he placed it in a locked storage unit, paid in cash, under a name not connected to the store. Within 48 hours, the storage unit's manager contacted him. Confused, the doll was found sitting outside the unit door. The lock had not been broken. There were no signs of forced entry. Moore stopped trying to move it after that. Emily visited again, this time with no intention of purchasing it. She wanted to observe. She later wrote that the atmosphere around the doll felt different the second time. Heavier, as if something had been completed. She photographed it again, and again, the images disturbed her, not because of what was visible, but because of what was not. In several photos, reflections did not align with the room's layout. In one image, the glass of the doll's eyes reflected a silhouette that matched neither Emily nor Moore. Emily did not post these images publicly. She shared them privately with a small group of Within a week, members of that group deleted their accounts. One sent a final message, stating only that he felt observed when thinking about the doll. The next buyer was a man whose name appears only once in the archive. He purchased the doll anonymously, through Moore, after offering significantly more than the asking price. According to Moore, the man appeared calm, focused. He did not ask questions. 3 days later, his family reported him missing. His vehicle was found parked on the side of a rural road. The doll was in the passenger seat. Authorities ruled the case inconclusive. The doll was returned to the shop by a towing company employee who claimed he felt uneasy touching it. He refused payment. BT's point Emily Carter stopped responding to emails. Her last known online activity was a brief forum post, archived before deletion. She wrote that she believed the doll did not attach itself to people. It attached itself to narratives, stories, attention. She speculated that the doll resurfaced whenever it was forgotten, as if neglect triggered its return. That theory gained traction after her disappearance. Emily Carter did not die publicly. There was no report, no article, no closure. She simply stopped existing online. Her phone number disconnected. Her email returned errors. Her social media accounts were wiped clean within days. Some claimed this was deliberate. Others believed it was not her decision. The doll, meanwhile, remained. Daniel Moore attempted one final solution. He contacted a private buyer who specialized in problem artifacts. The buyer requested anonymity and refused to meet in person. The transaction was completed remotely. The doll was shipped with tracking. According to Moore, the package was marked as delivered. The buyer denied receiving it. 2 days later, the doll was back on the shelf. It was positioned differently this time, facing outward as if waiting. Moore stopped touching it after that. The most unsettling detail emerged months later. A user on a general discussion forum uploaded a photo claiming to show the doll currently available for purchase. The image was blurry, the background indistinct, no location provided. The doll looked unchanged. The shame lace, the Sama tag. Only the handwriting appeared newer. Below the name Emily was a second line, written smaller, almost as an afterthought. Returned. The post was deleted within minutes, but screenshots remain, and people continue to ask the same question. If the doll cannot be kept, if it cannot be destroyed, and if it always comes back, then who decides where it waits? At some point, the story stopped feeling like an investigation. It began to feel like documentation, not an attempt to explain the doll, but an effort to record its presence before it erased itself again. By mid-2025, references to the doll no longer appeared in paranormal spaces at all. They surfaced instead in comment sections, under unrelated videos, in archived threads about lost media, in discussions that had nothing to do with horror. Always brief, always vague, always followed by silence. People stopped asking what the doll was. They started asking how long it had been there. Daniel Moore closed his shop to the public shortly after Emily Carter vanished. Officially, it was for renovations. Unofficially, according to one archived message from a local business forum, Moore claimed he could no longer sleep in the building. He described eerie movement after hours, despite security footage showing nothing out of place. The doll remained inside. Moore refused interviews. When contacted by phone months later, he confirmed only one thing. The doll had never left the premises again. Not because it couldn't, but because no one would take it. Attempts to document the doll continued without Emily. A small group of researchers compiled what they believed to be the final archive. Screenshots, photos, transcriptions, metadata from corrupted audio files. Everything that still existed. They noticed the pattern no one had addressed before. Every owner who suffered a fatal incident had interacted with the doll in the same way. They did not fear it. They attempted to use it. One buyer tried to record near it. Another attempted to ask questions. Another reportedly joked about testing it. Those who treated it as an object remained unaffected. Those who treated it as a source did not. This reframed the entire narrative. The doll did not harm people randomly. It responded to curiosity. One final incident sealed that theory. A man claiming to be an audio technician posted anonymously about a file he received from an unknown source. The file contained background noise, faint whispers, and a low-frequency distortion. Embedded metadata showed it had been created inside a retail space. The man stated he enhanced the audio. What he found disturbed him enough to delete the post within an hour. But copies remained. Those who listened described the same thing. Overlapping voices, speaking names that matched real people. Some listeners recognized details from unsolved cases in their own regions. The file ended abruptly with a single word. Repeated. Returned. The technician never posted again. By late 2025, the doll's image resurfaced one last time. The photo was not shared on a paranormal forum. It appeared on a generic resale listing platform. No description. No price. Just a single image. The doll stood on a wooden shelf. Clean. Centered. Facing forward, the background was intentionally blurred. No store name. No state. No identifiable features. But the tag was visible. Emily, not for children young. Beneath it written in newer ink. Currently available. The listing disappeared within minutes. But enough people saw it, enough to screenshot. Enough to remember. What makes this story unsettling is not the implication that the doll is supernatural. It is the implication that it does not need to be. Nothing in the records suggests possession. Nothing points to ritual. Nothing confirms intent. Only response. The doll appears where attention gathers. It remains where it is acknowledged. It returns when removed, and it does nothing until someone asks it to. We do not know where it is now. That information was deliberately withheld by everyone involved. Not out of fear, out of responsibility, because every time the location became public, something followed. An accident. A disappearance. A decision that could not be undone. So the final agreement was simple. The doll would remain unlisted, unadvertised, unexplained. It would exist quietly, as it always had, waiting for someone to decide it was more than an object. This story was assembled from public posts, archived material, private messages, and secondhand accounts. Many sources are no longer accessible. Names were altered at the request of those who shared their experiences. We do not claim the doll is cursed. We do not claim it is dangerous. We do not believe in the supernatural. But after reviewing everything that remains, we do not want to be associated with it, and neither did the people who tried to keep it. If you ever come across a porcelain doll that has no listed origin, no clear history, and no reason to keep returning, do not ask where it came from. Do not ask what it knows. And most importantly, do not ask it to remember. At some point, we stopped looking for new information. Not because it was no longer available, but because every attempt to continue led to the same conclusion. The story did not expand. It repeated itself. The doll was sold. The doll returned. People asked questions, and something followed. No new details ever changed that pattern. There were no answers hidden deeper in the archives. No final revelation waiting to be uncovered. Only the same outcome, documented again and again across different years, different platforms, and different lives. So we stopped, not out of fear, out of understanding. Because some stories are not meant to be finished. They are meant to be left exactly where they are. Everything you have just heard was collected from public sources, archived discussions, and secondhand accounts. Names were altered. Locations were removed. Images were described, not shown. We do not claim this story is true. We do not claim it is false. But after assembling it, we chose not to look any further. And if the doll still exists somewhere, it will not be because someone is searching for it. It will be because someone forgot to stop.